views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, it's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to journalists and writers and editors and photographers and filmmakers and all different people who are involved in Bronx media. The whole idea is if they're going to put something out in the Bronx, we're going to find out who they are and get you a little background as to what it's all about. So for this evening, we're going to start off with a longtime friend, the Bronx Socialite, ladies and gentlemen, a little drum roll there, and it is our good friend Lisa D. Gomez. Who is the Bronx Socialite, and she joins us now somewhere in the Bronx via telephone. Nice to have you with us, Lisa. What's going on?
Thank you for having me back. I'm really excited.
Good. Tell us, we're going to get into the book that you've written, which apparently is a continuation of a series, but start off with the Bronx Socialite. Let's just bring us up to date. Where is that blog at, and how are you doing with it?
Yes, so I'm still blogging at the Bronx Socialite, focusing on small businesses and local events and, seeing all there is to be seen in the borough. But what I've been really focusing on for the past couple of years is my fiction writing, which has been my true passion for as long as I can remember.
So let's not be shy and get right to it. I'm going to say the name of this kind of series that you've been working on, and I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but it's called Cooties and Other Kindergarten Quandaries. So why don't you explain what, how, and why we have Cooties and Other Kindergarten Quandaries?
Absolutely. So despite the title, it's actually not a children's book. It is about 4 friends who are children, though. They are kindergartners, and they have super intelligence. They're crazy smart, but they are still in kindergarten, so they're dealing with regular kindergarten problems like the boogeyman, older kids, their evil substitute teacher. So this is kind of the task that they have to deal with, and the novella actually follows them throughout their school year, dealing with all these different issues.
So let's rewind a little bit. You have always been a writer. You had always wanted to be a writer. Talk about how we got from way back there to a point where you're really working on this series.
Yeah, I've always been a writer. Fiction writing is my first passion. I've been doing it since I was a kid. And in college, I was actually a creative writing major at Baruch. So I actually wrote the first story for the novella Cooties while I was at Baruch. So it's been a long time coming.
I have never read a book about Cooties before, and so we're going to delve into this. Talk about what was it that inspired you to get into this mindset of being with 4 young kids and writing about the world through their eyes?
So it's actually inspired by one of my friends told me once that whenever I told stories about myself as a kid, he said, "Why do you always sound like your current self, like your 20-something-year-old self, but you're telling us about yourself when you were 3?" And I said, "That's just how I was thinking. That's really what I was thinking in that moment." So it inspired me to think about, what if we had these small kids, these kindergartners, thinking about their small problems? How can we form a coup? How can we start a petition and, rebel against the establishment? And that's the way that these kids think. And so that was how I came to think about, these kids and put them in all these situations.
I'm always interested in the creative muse of people who write fiction or really write anything. And so what kind of inspires you to do that, to get in their mind? And develop this not only to kind of tell kind of a funky, fun story, but also to do it over a period of time and extend, the boundaries of it each time?
Well, actually, the first chapter of the novella, which is called Cooties, was actually just a standalone. I didn't plan it out as a series or to continue writing it. But I actually wrote it and kind of just left it alone for a couple of years. But I knew that I just really loved those characters. They were just so much fun to write, and their voices, and that's really what it came down to, is that they were just fun to write. They were very cool. They're cool kids. And I wanted to see what else I could do with them. What other scenarios can I put them in? What challenges can I put them up against? Because the thing is that they take themselves very seriously. They know that they're smart, and they think that they are smarter than everybody else, including the adults that they come into contact with. So part of the fun of doing that, of writing it, is kind of challenging them to confront sort of that arrogance a little bit as well. And yeah, it was just really fun. And some of it is inspired by, my actual memories from school. Like, I'm sure that a lot of us remember the kid that tipped his nose all the time, or we had a weird substitute teacher, and it was just a fun way to kind of go back to those memories and explore.
Yeah. Don't I remember that? Talk a little bit about, I was thinking about series like Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. It's always difficult if for even musicians that create their first album and then they say, well, now what are you going to do? Because it was like everything you thought of in the first, 20 years of your life, and now you've got to condense the second album into, the 1 or 2 years. Talk about trying to follow up what you felt like was a very successful first attempt, and now you're up to number 3, but you want to make each one better. Has that become a challenge? Do you really kick yourself and say, I don't know if it's as good as the first one? Or do you feel comfortable that it's really grown and developed each step of the way?
Yeah, I definitely think that trying to put them in new challenges was a way to kind of challenge myself and get them to progress a little bit. Each character definitely grows from the beginning to the end, which the last story is actually graduation. So it does help also that it follows them along the school year. Because I kind of had a goal, at the end, even though I hadn't yet written that story, it definitely helped to have a timeline about where I knew I wanted to end, and see where the journey would take the kids.
This is a terrible question. When you put your head on the pillow at night, are you still writing the next episode or reviewing what you did? I'm always interested in that process of creating, especially, we're going to have a news writer and a journalist coming on in our second segment. His sense of writing is wholly different from yours. You have kind of a range. You could create anything. You could put him on a spaceship if you want. So when you are in your own head, are you now creating the next step or visualizing what the next step should be?
Absolutely. So while I think I'm done with these 4 kids, I've already written a novel. So this is a novella, very much shorter. But I've written a novel that I've been working on for the past year. And I already have an idea for the second novel. Even though the first one isn't done, it's still in editing mode and everything. There are always story ideas, and they come out of nowhere. You could be sitting on the train. I could be walking down the street, and you just hear a character, which sounds kind of crazy, but you definitely just hear a character, or you see something like, hey, what if this happened? And that is just the way that my mind works in terms of writing down stories, or just like the seed gets planted and you're like, what can I do with this? Or this is like a really cool character.
And how much of it is based on reality? I'm sorry, I forgot. You have your own children, or do you go into kindergarten and see who the kids are? Or are you really conjuring it up from zero?
I don't have any kids. One of my very first jobs was actually working with kindergarten kids and I've worked at a preschool for a little bit, but it's mostly based on my own memories. I have very vivid memories of kindergarten and elementary school, and yeah, it's really based on the stuff that I remember and seeing how I can kind of play around with those memories as opposed to actual kids.
Lisa, you are really a joy because, I mean, it comes right through that, you just have this world going on in your head. And this is maybe a crazy question. Do you love these kids? You must love these kids. You must, get into their heads, understand who they are, and have compassion for them, right? Am I right about that? Like, in your mind, you visualize them as real people.
Yes. Definitely. And they all do have their own interests and personalities. And yeah, they're just so much fun. Like there's like one of the characters whose name's Kenneth. He's like very rebellious. And he's super into politics and rising up and taking down the establishment. And it's just so fun to write like a 4-year-old who's into that.
Fantastic. We're just about out of time, Lisa. So let's just now, runningwildpress.com is the publisher of the latest. So now this is a novella anthology, Volume 3, Book 3. We can go to lisadgomez.com as your website. People who have heard us and are seeing us tonight are going to say, how do I get this really cool book and how do I find your stuff? Is that the way to do it?
Yes, definitely. You can go to any links on those websites. It's on Amazon or IndieBound. But absolutely all the links to purchase are on Running Wild Press or on my own website, which is lisadgomez.com.
An absolute joy. I haven't checked it out, but I am going to check it out. And you are really in another world. And I'm so pleased that the Bronx has inspired you to be that. We hope you'll come back with more stuff, tell us more stories. And, there's a part of me that says, why don't you bring the kids with you? But I guess that you can't really do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, Lisa Gomez, everybody check out the Bronx Socialite as well. And we thank you for being with us on the Bronx Buzz this evening. And we'll see you around town, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we'll see you around. All right, we're going to take a short break. And then when we come back, we're going to visit with Zach Williams of City and State New York, and we'll change gears, do a whole different point of view from a journalist's point of view. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go along, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, it's Ava, and this is Tess from Vivo's Do It Yourselfie, where we recreate the hottest looks from today's biggest music videos.
After cleaning out our closet, we have a lot of clothes we don't wear anymore.
Like this old t-shirt.
It's not garbage, it's actually a brand new rug.
And to make it, all you need to do is cut, tie, and glue.
Cut the t-shirt into strips.
Tie the strips into knots.
And glue the knots to the bath mat. I love it. Give your garbage another life.
And recycle.
Hey, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. That was thoroughly enjoyable. And this will also be enjoyable, but in a different way. It's my pleasure to welcome Zach Williams from City and State New York. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Just a little background. People, I hope they know City and State New York. You can get a subscription. You can get it in your email every day. You can also get a magazine, which in this day and age is like, what? You can actually have a hard copy. But talk about yourself, how long you've been with City and State, and a little bit about your background and those kinds of things.
Well, I've been a journalist in New York City for some years, 2 years at City and State, where I cover the state legislature and the Cuomo administration. We're a small newsroom, but we got a lot of punch to us.
I think that's true.
And I think we're known for a little bit of our witticisms, and certainly for just giving the politicians, whether at the city or at the state level, a run for their money.
You're not afraid to be snarky, and that's a good thing for, he doesn't want me to put that on him. But just for you, you grew up where? Grew up in the city? Grew up out of town?
I grew up in a small town in Northern California, about 100 miles from the Oregon border, so quite a lot different than the Bronx, but like here, also kind of salt of the earth people. But certainly moving to the city is a big difference, and you don't even need to go into the forest to chop firewood in the summer, so I'm liking it.
Do you get up to Albany a lot?
I go up there for session days, so we're a couple weeks out, but once January starts, budget season gets up and going.
You'll be back up there.
It's going to be busy times up
Let's
there.
start. You talked about covering Governor Cuomo. He's an interesting character in many ways because he's a Democrat, but he's a very strong individual personality. And while I think Democrats are very pleased with the legislative session they had last year, some of them tell me that it's still a struggle sometimes to get him to move. Maybe you could characterize what Governor Cuomo's relationship is with the two legislative bodies.
Well, he's a year into his third term, and I think for most of that time, he was kind of the bridge, if you will, between the Democrats who controlled the Assembly and the Republicans.
I think he loved that role. I think he loved being that guy.
He's always someone that's looking to own the middle. And when the Republicans controlled the state Senate and the Democrats the Assembly, he really got to be the deal maker between the two factions. But now, after 2018, the Democrats got the Senate and the Assembly, so he's had to triangulate in different ways. I think there still is an opportunity to do that in the Senate because there's relatively moderate lawmakers from Long Island, from the Hudson Valley, and other areas of upstate. So he's still trying to make deals, but at the same time, the Senate Democrats and the Senate or the Assembly Democrats got ideas of their own, so he's been frustrated at a few points.
I think that's true because he'd like to be the deal maker, but now the energy is coming from elsewhere, and it almost forces him to kind of ride coattails, and that's not where Governor Cuomo likes to be.
No, he likes to be in command.
Yes.
He's the king. Sometimes we like to call him King Cuomo II. But by and large, he's been able to work pretty well with the Democratic majorities. But if we remember the Amazon deal last year, really got things into kind of a mess up in Albany. He felt some of the Senate Democrats didn't fight hard enough for that deal, and he wasn't pleased at all that Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris of Queens was working against that deal, nor that Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the majority leader, appointed him to an important state body that had a bit of authority over that deal.
I don't want to, because that deal could take us, 2 days to complete. So I don't want to get into that. But it sounds like you see that as like a really big thing because he and the mayor crafted this deal and they basically threw it out. And that for a guy who sees himself a certain way, that's a big challenge. You think that was a landmark moment in a way?
I don't think he'll ever get over Amazon.
Wow. That's
still talks about it.
Fascinating thing. So you wrote this excellent piece, fascinating, interesting, informative, on the plans for health care. Now, I have talked individually to many of Bronx senators who are very enthusiastic about the opportunity here potentially to do single payer. From your perspective, how optimistic is that? Could that be reality? Are we at a point where now New York State is practically going to lead the country in that kind of thing? What are your thoughts?
Well, I would say arguably we've never come closer to implementing a state-level single-payer system in New York, but there's still a long ways to go. Now, the bill's been proposed in the Assembly for nearly 25 years by
Wow,
Assemblymember.
that long? I would not have thought that.
And that's only half of Richard Gottfried's tenure in the Assembly. So he's been going after this issue for a very long time, changing the bill as it goes. And now he's got a partner in the state Senate, of course, Bronx Democrat Gustavo Rivera, who's the chair of the Health Committee. But there's some very difficult obstacles they got to get over. One of them, of course, is Governor Cuomo, who isn't so keen about having a state-level single-payer system. And I think really the reason, more than anything, is how do you pay for it? You would have to nearly double the state budget to pay for a single-payer system. But more importantly, there's an even bigger problem, and that's the Trump administration. A lot of what you would essentially need is the federal government to agree that Medicaid funding for the state for the state Medicaid program could be diverted into a single-payer system. And I think it's pretty safe to say that you can't count on the Trump administration to do that.
Just to go back to kind of our earlier conversation, it also puts the governor in the position again of having to listen to others rather than having him create it. So, well, that's nice that you guys want it, but I'm not ready to be kind of the clubhouse guy to just say, let's do it. Let's talk about the paying for it. The way it has been presented by Senator Biaggi, Senator Rivera, and maybe even some others is it's like, take one from one, you're paying so much already, just move it into a different pot and redistribute it so that everybody can get health care. Is that financially a realistic way of looking at it, that you're paying so much already into the exchange and into everything, all the individual providers, take that money, put it into a big pot and redistribute it for single payer? Is that oversimplistic?
There's an argument to be made that if you took out all the overhead that goes into insurance companies and redirected that money into healthcare itself, directly delivering services, there'd be some significant savings that could be made. However, when we talk about redirecting the funding, it's certainly not as easy as just taking money from the state Medicaid program, a lot of which is federal funding, as I mentioned, and just putting it into a new state system called New York Health, which is what would be set up by the New York Health Act. The politics are very complicated. I think even supporters like Richard Gottfried or Gustavo Rivera would concede that you can't just do this overnight. You need several years to make the transition. And that's not even to say about all these different wrinkles that would come up, like what do you do with people's healthcare insurance that they have already? Public sector unions in particular are very defensive about keeping the health care that they've already negotiated with the city and state as it is. And if it just turns to a single payer program, how do you kind of compensate them for all that political leverage they use to get that health care at the cost of their own wages? So the politics alone are complicated, and needless to say, the finances are more complicated than simply moving one system into the other.
What you're saying reflects very well in my own interviews and interaction with Senator Rivera, because you would think, because we know that that's where he'd like to go, that he would say, hey, yeah, we're going to get everybody together, we're going to do it. But he clearly recognizes the complexities that you're talking about, that it's not going to be quite that easy. We could talk about, there's many more issues in healthcare, but I do want to talk about education funding. And you have a piece. The dialogue, I've been on the air here at BronxNet for 25 years, and the dialogue has always been about the New York State lottery monies, the campaign for fiscal equity, and your headline says, will New York students finally get the funding they were promised? What's holding it up? What are the issues from, funding all the available monies that are out there?
Politics. Who's going to get credit for all of this? It's not that Governor Cuomo or Senate Democrats or even Assembly and Senate Republicans don't want to give more money for schools, but again, it comes down to how do you pay for it, and of course, whose idea is better.
Whose signature is at the bottom?
Now, you mentioned the CFE decision. That's a lawsuit that resolved about 13 years ago, and it led to what's called foundation aid. Now, at that time, then Governor Spitzer promised that there would be a huge increase in state support for local school districts. Now, of course, he lasted less than a year after making that promise, and then the recession started, and then the tumult of Governor Patterson's administration. Enter Andrew Cuomo in 2010, 2011, and he's saying he's not beholden to what those two predecessors said, and they fought about it ever since. I think the key thing to look for in the next year or two are two things. One, we got this huge state budget deficit, about $4 billion. It's going to be really tough to not just close that gap, but to do that while increasing aid for local school districts, including here in New York City and in the Bronx. The second thing is more political, and that's what's going to happen after the 2020 elections. Assuming everything works out with the budget deficit, which is kind of driven by healthcare spending, particularly in Medicaid, you got to keep an eye out for if the Democrats get 42 out of 63 seats in the state Senate, a lot could change. If there's one thing that unites lawmakers, maybe even from both parties, it's the idea of more money for my local schools. And if they get 42 votes, they could override Governor Cuomo's veto in the future.
You know, one thing, and we're just about out of time, and I'm just curious, the dialogue about mayoral control of the schools has come up. I mean, this is not directly related to funding, but the dialogue about that has come up. Do you think at this point the state legislature has the stomach for that fight, to overturn it? I know the dialogue is out there. That doesn't mean, you know, the sides have been drawn yet.
Well, again, everything's all about the power dynamics.
Right.
Usually when we think
Especially
of
in New
mayoral
York State,
control, it's been between the governor and the mayor, and needless to say, they're not the best of friends. But I suspect that the legislature or any other political body, once they get authority over something, a little bit of control, they don't want to just give it up. And the mayor, likewise, wants to keep control, whether, you know. So I think in the session ahead, whenever we look at this issue in particular, we got to think, why would the state legislature and lawmakers from New York City want to give up something that gives them leverage over the mayor?
I think your analysis on both accounts, on health care, the fact that it's not going to be so easy and it's not going to happen right away is correct. And I also think they, which is why I asked the question, I don't think they have the stomach right now to overhaul the school system again. It would just be chaotic. To try and restructure again. Oh my goodness. Zach Williams, you're the best. We want you back. We want you.
Let's
and we
do
want
it again.
You back. Great. Thank you so much, and say hello to all our friends over at City and State New York.
Thank you.
Folks, you know what's going to happen now? We're going to say goodnight. We'll see you around. We'll be back Monday. Holidays and everything else, all the good things in the Bronx.